you all had any questions from the previous classes? No? Hello? Well, welcome to class 4, not 2. That's on me. But I guess a brief recap. The Episcopal Church's definition of Anglicanism. We have learned everything at this point that they use to define Anglicanism pretty much. Well, I guess next week will be our relationship to the See of Canterbury. We're going to get questions about that today, though. But the Via Media, through the Elizabethan settlement, our devotion to Scripture, tradition, and reason as the three-legged stool, and the Via Media, or the middle way. So first class, we talked about Augustine of Canterbury and the origins of the middle way, Thomas Becket and Henry VIII, kind of who has the authority, church or state, or ultimately where authority lies. Becket, the king tried to usurp his authority over the church. It's debatable if the church had the authority or should have had that authority, but after this incident, the church kind of took precedence over the crown until Henry VIII, when he asserted his authority over the Church of England, cutting off the ties to Rome, and declaring himself the supreme head. Essentially, the biggest thing about difference of his church was the head was no longer the Pope. It was Henry VIII. He was the head of the church. It still was in Latin. Clergy couldn't marry. That's about it. The real reforms during the Tudor line and during the English Reformation were Edward and Elizabeth. Edward was a true reformer, even though he was 9 when he ascended to the throne. But he and Thomas Cranmer and a few other bishops reformed the English church into reformed it in the Calvinist tradition. So believing in the teachings of John Calvin, a reformer in Geneva. So ultimately seeing communion just as a spiritually present, but not actually present or with it, as the Lutherans would believe. Superiority of Scripture. There was some debate of taking this further and becoming more Presbyterian in their polity and doing away with bishops. That didn't happen under Edward, but that is a long-standing debate after Edward during the Elizabethan time. But under Edward is when the first 2 prayer books were written. The 1549 was the first one, took some significant changes, but not as far as the 1552. They reduced the emphasis of Eucharist or the Mass being a sacrifice in and of itself, but a reminder of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. In the 1549 was the first development of the morning and evening prayer, what I argue is the heart of Anglican spirituality. Cranmer developed these 2 services out of the dissolution of the monasteries that Henry VIII did. The monasticism played such an important role in the English church from its founding in Celtic Christianity and even with Augustine, that the loss of them was going to have a big impact on the spirituality of the English people. So Cranmer merged the offices of the hours, which was 9 different services that monks would pray from morning through the middle of the night, and developed morning and evening prayer. It emphasized justification by faith and predestination, and the 1549 was not received well. There was literally a revolt. 1552 took a harder reformed swing. Reformed and Calvinist are synonymous terms. So the 1552 took a much harder Calvinistic swing, shortened the Eucharistic prayer, rooted out all belief in transubstantiation, or anything that could even be taken that way was taken out, removed anointing, exorcisms, blessings, and it forced public baptism as the norm, which beforehand midwives were mostly doing all of the baptizing, for fear if the baby died suddenly or very quickly shortly after birth, it would be saved. So midwives were generally the ones who did the baptizing.
How did the people respond to the 1552 if they revolted?
To be fair, it was not in existence long enough to really matter. Because Edward died in July of 1553. The 1552 was only required worship November 1st of 1552 onward, when Mary ascended to the throne 12 days after Edward's death because of Lady Jane Grey. It was outlawed. So, who knows? It did not have time to be received well or poorly. But Mary restored the Catholic Church. She worked with the Pope to make the Church's head Rome again, reaffirmed the 6 Articles, which were the articles that Henry VIII made at the end of his Reformation, that pretty much reiterated everything that the Catholic Church was doing was right, just he's now the head. She removed the part about her being the head of the church and made it Rome. That's about it. She only had 5 years on the throne, so not much was fully done to fully convert the population back to a Catholic faith. The biggest change, though, was Elizabeth. This was from Henry's second. She was a result of Henry's second marriage to Anne Boleyn. She had a 45-year-long reign, oversaw a great period of stability. And one of the first acts that she started to do was to solve the religious question of England. She did that through the Via Media, or the Middle Way. One of her famous quotes, debatable if she said it though, was, "I have no desire to make windows into men's souls." She did not care where you were on the religious line, if you're Catholic or Calvinistic, but she wanted the English people to worship together. So it's really here where we see the threads of Augustine's letter to Pope Gregory, where Pope Gregory said, find what's best in both churches and make your own. We see similar themes through the Via Media, or the Middle Way, where she was not trying to make people happy, but tolerate the faith and the worship so that everyone could join in and do it. And she did that through a number of laws. The first was an act of supremacy. She made herself the supreme governor of the church. Henry's act of supremacy, which made him the supreme head of the church, was criticized because only Jesus Christ is the head of the church. No human is. No other human can be. I also think there's probably some sort of gender issue, because at this time, a woman, the head of the church, is probably not something a whole bunch of male bishops really wanted at this time. So she donned the title Supreme Governor. So she still approved bishops, but wasn't making church policy or canon law as Henry VIII could. She also passed the Act of Uniformity, which required that all elected officials or all officials take communion 3 times in the Church of England, 3 times a year. And she reverted, called for a new prayer book, the 1559, reverted to some of the 1549 beliefs in that to make it more appeasing to the Catholics within her country, because there's a lot of wiggle room for their own beliefs in the 1549. She also, with her bishops, developed the 39 Articles, which taught the Reformed beliefs of this new Church of England. But again, it left a lot of wiggle room, so much so that John Henry Newman, way later in the 1800s, who was a Tractarian or an Anglo-Catholic in the Church of England, actually wrote a tract, which were letters that Anglo-Catholics made that showed how the Catholic faith does fit into the 39 Articles. So there was a lot of wiggle room for other people's beliefs in them. And it was not doctrine per se, just more or less an explanation. So it wasn't taken as the creeds were. And again, was it successful? During Elizabeth's time, yes. Only a minor rebellion. During the time, the continent saw huge wars over religion. So there does seem to be some sort of establishment of a middle way during Elizabeth's reign. After, very much debatable. James VI and first, because he was James VI of Scotland and the first of England. He ascended to the throne after Elizabeth's death. And there was a lot more issues, per se, in after Elizabeth. There was people who wanted to go further in the Reformed way of getting rid of bishops. Puritans, the people who came and founded New England, wanted to have stricter religious laws that looked more like the reforms happening in Geneva and Switzerland. That was not what the monarchy wanted ever. So there was a lot of debate and struggle between that. So much so that Charles I had the English Civil War over bishops, and the Puritans did win out for a time being. So it is debatable if it worked after Elizabeth.
All right, so full.
Thank you.
But so this week, we are talking about the Episcopal Church. So that is the Episcopal Church Shield, and this is Samuel Seabury, the first bishop in the Episcopal Church, Bishop of Connecticut. So I'm making a claim. The Episcopal Church was the first church to break off the Church of England. You may be wondering, isn't there a Scottish Episcopal Church who ordained our first bishop? Yes, but I don't think one could claim that they actually broke off. So the Scottish Episcopal Church, as we know it today, has a very complicated and long history. So in 1560 is when the Reformation actually started in Scotland, with John Knox trying to bring Calvinism or the Reformed theology into Scotland. James was about to ascend the throne, but he was also a child, like 2, when he took over the throne of Scotland. So it wasn't until about 1580 when he could actually influence the church in his first kingdom, Scotland. and he wanted bishops. So he had 2 people consecrated as bishop. I could not figure it out who did the consecration of these 2 bishops. I'm assuming because of the relationship with Elizabeth, she had them consecrated in England. I don't know. That seemed very hard for me to try to track down. But the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland did not want bishops, but the king got what he wanted. And then it increased from 2 to 7 bishops, and restored the Archbishop of St. Andrew, which was the primate of the Church of Scotland when it was Catholic.
They're right here, Phil.
So when James became the head of both kingdoms of Scotland and England, he tried to unite the kingdoms. The efforts were stalled in both parliaments because he had a parliament in London and in Edinburgh. But he did don the title. He did don or attempt to don the title of the King of Great Britain. Never took off. Was only able to make the Scottish Parliament grant him that title, but it was only a titular title, so there was no actual merit to it. So he was officially the King of Scotland and the King of England, but known alternatively as the King of Great Britain. But by the same time, he was also trying to unite the churches to make a Church of Great Britain rather than the Church of England and the Church of Scotland. When Charles I took the crown, Calvinists in both kingdoms started civil wars. Ultimately, the Puritans took over both Scotland and England. After the death of Oliver Cromwell in England, Parliament asked for King Charles II, the son of Charles I, to come take the throne and to restore the monarchy. Bishops returned, but the Scots still wanted their Presbyterian government. Presbyterian was the style, or what we would call polity, church governance, that they had. So there was a presbytery, so elders in the Church of Scotland who would meet at each church, and they would go to a session, but there was no bishops, and the General Assembly was kind of the overseeing authority over all of the churches. They wrote their own in 1637, influenced by the 1549 prayer book. So it had a slightly different lineage than the prayer book that the UK was using, because they made a new one that's still used today, the 1662. That lineage went back to the 1552 lineage. The 1637 Scottish prayer book was hated, caused a lot of issues, kind of led to the Civil War as well by the Puritans in Scotland. After Charles II died, his brother, James the Seventh and Second, a Catholic, took the throne and tried to restore the monarchy, tried to restore Rome as the head of the church. Parliament fought back, and William and Mary started the Glorious Revolution, sent an army to England. It was bloodless. James threw his monarch seal into the Thames and then fled for France, which that caused some issues because he never formally abdicated. Both the Scottish and English parliaments declared that James abdicated the throne, but most bishops did not feel like he did, or at least in Scotland, most of the bishops did not feel that he properly abdicated the throne. So they didn't. They all had to take an oath of allegiance to the monarchy, even though he was Catholic. And so all 7 bishops in Scotland and at least 7 in the UK were removed for office because they refused to take the oath of allegiance to William and Mary because they felt that their oath of allegiance to James was not relinquished. These bishops were called the non-jurors because they were not following, they would not give up their oath of allegiance to James. And so in Scotland, the Presbyterians in the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland took the opportunity, because all of the bishops had been deposed, to institute a Presbyterian style of government, which made the Church of Scotland a Presbyterian church, and that has been true ever since 1689. But that still left 7 bishops who have all been ordained a bishop, and they still practiced church, though they were not established. They baptized, they ordained people, they consecrated 1 or 2 new bishops during the time. But it was all illegal. Once the formal acts of union merging Scotland and England into one country came about in 1707, the Parliament passed the Act of Tolerance in 1711, which granted the Scottish Episcopals the right to practice their faith in Scotland, though they were not the established church. That did not prevent them from getting persecuted, because they still venerated Charles I for his martyrdom and stuff like that, which really angered the Presbyterians because they were not a big fan of Charles I. But so that is when the Scottish Episcopal Church took form. And after the Acts of Tolerance, they took a unique thing. Their last archbishop had died, so they did not ever grant someone the title of archbishop again. They elected amongst the 7 of them someone to become the primus, or the primate, so someone who is the first among equals, and that is kind of who presided over the church. But this long history is essentially just showing that they never actually broke up with the Church of England, because they were never really part of the Church of England. They were just 2 concurrent Anglican faiths kind of working together, at one point wanting to merge. James I and VI wanted the country to merge, but it never happened. So Scotland, the Scottish Episcopal Church, never broke off. Also, this is my friend right here. He is the provost of St. Mary's Cathedral in Glasgow. His name's Kelvin Haldsworth. He's pretty cool. I'm trying to convince him to come back to SF. He loves San Francisco. But yes. Where? Fair? I mean, I think Austin's pretty young. I think we'll have him for a minute. So this is Christ Church, Philadelphia. A perfect example of a colonial church. But so just a bit of framework. This is a quasi-decent map that I could find that was legible, but kind of shows the religious makeup of the colonies. The one thing I would note is that a lot of the screen is just big sizes of parishes, because, yeah, basically. I mean, it's shocking of like how many clergy were in the colonies. Like New Jersey had 17 clergy people at the Revolution, and that dwindled down to 2 at one point. Stuff like that. But the colonies had a diverse religious background. We all know that Massachusetts was founded by Pilgrims and the Puritans, and they were established the Congregational Puritan Church in Massachusetts and Connecticut. My family helped found the Connecticut colony. We're the Clark family that I get from my mom's side literally is on the charter of New Haven. So I am a Calvinist, sadly. I guess in my blood. But New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut were all Puritan havens. Roger Williams founded Rhode Island as a free state, so there was no established church, and you can practice the freedom of your own religion. New York, having been a Dutch colony before the English took it over, the established church was initially the Dutch Reformed Church. So still technically Calvinistic, but through the Dutch variant. But once England took over, they established the Church of England, but the Church of England never had the most adherents. It was the Presbyterian Church that had the most congregants in New York. Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers, but actually had a fair amount of Anglicans living there. Same with New Jersey, was established. Yes. No, New Jersey did not have established church. Maryland was founded as a Catholic colony, but later on established the Church of England. Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia all had established the Church of England. And what I mean by established is that it was the state-sanctioned church. Tax revenue could go for the upkeep of the church buildings. Sometimes state property was given for the churches to be built. And especially in these lower colonies, churches had a lot of civil power. What?
This is called the separation of the church.
Uh-huh.
Okay. American best idea.
You just thought of Roger Williams in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Focuses on that as the beginning in America, what really got the idea of separation of churches established.
I mean, so the statement was about the separation of church and state in America. The shocking thing, even though our Constitution does seem to imply that there is a separation of church and state, is that it took some states in New England like 1820 until they disestablished all the churches. So it was a long time. If I'm not mistaken, it's one of those things that is assumed by the Constitution, but not explicit.
Constitution does not forbid state from establishing a church. Only forbids counties that abolish their established church.
Ish. I say that because my last church was in New York, and to change anything about our bylaws required us to go to the state because there was an establishment law from 1790 that still dictated the Episcopal Church and made things much harder to change. But I guess an overview of the Church of England in the colonies, it was never the largest denomination in the 13 original colonies. It definitely had places where it was large, so Virginia and the Carolinas were great strongholds for it. Many of the colonies did establish, though, the Church of England. So that meant tax revenue was given to churches. It meant that vestries took on way more importance. Vestries were a thing for a long time in churches, but 1589, Elizabeth asked them to start focusing often on assisting the poor. Because the monasteries were dissolved, that service that the mendicant orders, so Franciscans and other orders, were offering to the poor was diminished. So they asked vestries to use church money and to go support the poor in their towns. But in the colonies, especially in places like Virginia, vestries took on way more civil government roles, almost basically being the role of the county is today. So they did road infrastructure. Any infrastructure that a town needed was done by the vestry. Even courts were run through vestries in Virginia in the 16 and 1700s. So again, it acted very much as local government, the vestries of the church. One unique thing about all of the Episcopal churches in all 13 colonies was that they were all under the Bishop of London. He was the bishop for all the churches in the 13 colonies. There was not an American bishop or a bishop for any of the colonies. To kind of assist on the day to create ground and overview that a bishop would normally have in their diocese, they started this commissary system. And these were in place in states to oversee all of the churches in the state, to encourage church growth, to kind of suggest people for ordination. So in many ways, they acted as bishops, but they did not have the authority to ordain. So they would still send people back to London for them to get ordained to their orders.
Were the commissaries collective body, or were they just one person?
One person over a state. So like there was one in Virginia. This guy, the Reverend Thomas Bray, he was the commissary for Maryland. So when they became established in like 1689 as the Church of England, they sent this man, or he was already in the States, but they made him the commissary. So again, they function very much as a bishop without any of the authority of a bishop. So they could not ordain. While clergy could be educated in the States at things like King College, now Columbia, they all had to go back to England to get ordained.
Were they appointed by the Bishop of London?
Yep. So at this time, there was no broader infrastructure other than the commissary was kind of the first instant. There was no conventions or overseeing bodies. It was all the churches, their rector, and the bishop until the commissary came.
Why was there only one missionary in 1740? What happened to the system?
They just, I think just growing frustration. There was just calls for, it actually probably just makes sense for there to be bishops in the 13 colonies. But no one was really willing to do that in England at the time. I was reading, his name is Pritchard. He was the historian at Virginia Theological Seminary, and he has literally written the book on Episcopal Church history. And he didn't mention why we never got bishops. But skipping ahead a few slides, but when we got our 2 bishops ordained from England, the Church of England decided to make the first bishop of the New World in the Church of England, and that was in Nova Scotia. And it was a former, 13 colony person who was a loyalist and fled back to England, was sent back to the New World to live in Nova Scotia and become the first bishop of Nova Scotia in Canada. But that was only after we won the war. But we all know we should all know the origins of the American Revolution, but tension between the colonies and the homeland. The war started with the Battle of Lexington and Concord on April 19th, 1775. The Second Continental Congress, all of the colonial assemblies began voting for independence. So at the Second Continental Congress, they wrote the Declaration of Independence and formed a colonial government. There was mixed support for the revolution. About 40% were for it, 20 against, and 40 were completely neutral against it. The Loyalists mostly had support in the mid-Atlantic colonies, so New York in particular, and that was kind of the base for the British forces for much of the war. So the Anglican Church, ? During the Revolutionary War, most of the clergy who were of the Church of England supported the Crown and the Loyalists. During their ordination vows, they all had to swear allegiance to the king. And the prayer book required them to pray for the king's family, or the monarch's family, and the British Parliament. There was, though, a pretty big split between North and South, though. The North, about 80% of the clergy supported the monarchy, and in the South, 23% supported the monarchy. Again, New York was a big stronghold. This is Charles Ingalls. He was the rector of Trinity Wall Street, or now it's just Trinity Church, but the big church right downtown at the end of Manhattan Island. He was so bold to pray for the king when George Washington was attending church. And that caused such an uproar that they sacked his house, the rector's house on Rectory Street in New York. And so much so that, again, he fled back to England, and this man was elected the Bishop of Nova Scotia. So when we had our 2 bishops ordained through the English succession, they also ordained Charles Ingalls as the first bishop for the Americas in the Church of England. But because of the Loyalists' support, services were either canceled or held in secret. And it was very dangerous for Episcopal or Church of England clergy at this time. So my last church, Christ's Church, Rye, we actually had a rector murdered during the Revolution. No joke.
I thought you were talking about.
No. So I can't remember his name. I can probably look it up quickly, but they claimed it was suicide, but his throat was slit and he was shot and thrown literally in the ditch in the town square. In like 1775, right after, in like the summer. And then 2 years later, our church burnt down by arson. So, and we were not called Christ's Church at that time. We were Grace Church. So Grace Church went into hiding, met in a couple people's houses for literally 7 or 8 years until the end of the war. And we only really came out of that after John Jay's father, the first Chief Justice. The Jays are from Rye, New York, and were members of Grace Church, but he changed the name to Christ's Church because it's harder to be mad at Christ than it is Grace, I guess. And put into plans to build our second church. But that is the sole, like, I was at a church where our loyalist supporting clergy was literally murdered.
So how old is the church now? The one in existence now, how old is it?
I mean, it was founded in 1695.
I think we have.
Young,
And we've also had 4 church buildings. But out east, you're not an Episcopal church if it hasn't burned down twice. If you just read through all the histories, most of them have burnt down at least twice, if not 3 times. But anyway, in the South, it was a slightly different story. State assemblies, because they were so established in like places like Virginia and the Carolinas, they required the removal of prayers to the king and to make their oath of allegiance to the patriots in the Revolution. And Southern churches were more than okay to do that. The Continental Congress also then ruled that any church must also do the same, is to pray for the patriots in the Revolution. A new church coming. So in the midst of the Revolution, by 1780, a group of clergy and lay people in Maryland met to think of a new independent church. In particular, I think it's important that Maryland was the first one to decide this because of their unique state, because they were established, but it was much more of a Catholic stronghold. This man is William Smith. He was the head of Washington College, or I guess what would become Washington College. And he presided over this meeting. He was clergy. And so it came out with a few concrete actions after 3 years of meeting. They changed the name from the Church of England to the Protestant Episcopal Church. Were able to pass legislation giving them a statewide synod of clergy and laity that they would call a convention. And this was approved through the state legislature as well, and approved 3 people for ordination, 2 people for the priesthood, and 1, William Smith, for the episcopacy. They were not ordained to any of that. It's because we were not yet an independent country, even by 1783, those coming soon. Oops. So I kind of have these 2 concurring foundings. So while that was happening in Maryland, Smith had an influenced a former student named William White. And William White wrote a pamphlet calling for every state to do the same thing that Maryland just did, to form their own state conventions and make their own statewide dioceses, and for all of them to be overseen by a general convention that would meet triannually. But triannually. So this was a pamphlet called The Cause for the Episcopal Church, or the Protestant Episcopal Church, that went throughout the colonies during the war. In response to that, Samuel Seabury of Connecticut, he was currently at a church in New York though, was opposed to White's pamphlet, mostly over the laity's role in the church. So in a clergy convened a secret meeting to oppose White's pamphlet in Connecticut, and there they elected Samuel Seabury to the episcopacy. So he left for England in June 1783, still at war. And when he arrived, the English bishops refused to ordain him for two reasons. The oath of allegiance, Parliament would still have required them to swear an oath of allegiance, and they did not think that was proper. Samuel Seabury did not think that was proper, even though he was a loyalist, seeing that it looked slightly certain at this point that we were going to win. And also, the English bishops did not approve of the nature of his election, being a secret vote of just clergy, while the established Church of Connecticut was the Congregational Church, not the Episcopal Church, or not an Anglican church. That was very different than Maryland. Maryland, the Church of English was established, and it was an open public meeting in which they did elect William Smith to be bishop. The oath of allegiance was just the issue for him. There was later issues with William Smith about his drunkardness. So he was never ordained a bishop. So, undeterred, Samuel Seabury left England and went to Scotland, where he got 3 non-juror bishops to consecrate him. And 3 is important. It takes 3 bishops to make a bishop. It does, though. The laying on of 3 hands is the minimum you need to make a new bishop. That becomes issue later on. But the Scottish Episcopal Church forced Seabury to sign a concordant that stated that he would use the 49 prayer book as the basis of the next American prayer book. And so he did agree to that. Seabury fashioned his title, or fashioned himself, the Bishop of all America. That's a ring to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is the Bishop of all England, as opposed to the Archbishop of York, who is the Bishop of England, or the Bishop of England, or Primate of England. The all is apparently very important.
So which one is the bishop? York? Or?
York, but all England is Archbishop of Canterbury.
And that's still today?
Yep. That didn't become set until about 1450, but there was major issues between the 2 archbishops in England, and it was finally settled when the Archbishop of Canterbury was the primate of all England, and the Archbishop of York was the primate of England. All is the quite crucial word right there.
Tennis club in Wimbledon is all female tennis club.
Okay. I mean, Wimbledon, but it is in Canterbury Sea. So in 1785, he called a convocation of clergy. It was no laity were allowed. And this was not really a legislative body, but it was a time for Seabury to instruct his clergy, for him to reinstill proper doctrine, to ordain people. So it was not a collaborative or egalitarian, I guess, sense of the church. And so I have a slide on this, but Seabury was high church. So it placed a lot of emphasis on the importance of the historic episcopacy and the proper discipline and doctrine. And so in contrast, in the Mid-Atlantic and Southern states, they took a very different approach. They, by William White's pamphlet, they did eventually organize a meeting to set up this general convention. It had laid clergy and lay delegates from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and 5 other states. Again, my book did not specify who the 5 other states were. It just said 5 other states, which was not really helpful. But they all adopted a series of resolutions similar to Maryland. They called for each state to have their own bishop, for each state to have their own conventions, that the bishops, clergy, and lay leaders would all be in a unicameral assembly at General Convention. So the first General Convention was convened in 1785/86. They adopted a constitution and petitioned the English Church to consecrate 3 bishop candidates, and they were William White, Samuel Prevost, and David Griffith. David Griffith did not attend because he could not raise the funds to get back to England. But William White and Samuel Prevost did make it to England, and at the same time, in 1786, the English Parliament voted to allow the consecration of the American bishops without taking the oath of allegiance. Because by this point, we are our own independent country. Maybe they thought that we would eventually come back at some point, but they allowed for William White and Samuel Prevost to not have to say they swear to the king. And to contrast from Samuel Seabury, this whole structure we would generally call more low church. The historic episcopacy, though they wanted it and saw it some importance, it was not as important as it was to the high church people. They're also much more willing to allow lay people working in the church and having a say in the church. And something important for us all to understand, the difference between high and low church. So, high church, it is not synonymous with being Anglo-Catholic. So, you cannot associate high church with being Anglo-Catholic. That's anachronistic. High church came about well before the Anglo-Catholic movement even started. One could say that most Anglo-Catholics are in the high church realm because of their emphasis on ritual, but not all high church people are Anglo-Catholic. And the term was to describe opposition to the Calvinistic Puritan wing of the Church of England, stressed the importance of doctrine, discipline, and the Episcopal Church worship, and saw an importance of the historic episcopacy as necessary. Ministry and sacraments were the primary means of grace, clergy only over lay involvement. Low church is the opposite. It came about in opposition to the high church term. Saw value in other denominations and ways of doing church, minimized the authority of the episcopacy, stretched preaching and others over sacraments, saw lay involvement as a good thing. Think John Wesley. He would be considered a low church, Church of England priest. They stressed individualism, personal religious experience, and conversion by the Holy Spirit. So that is what high and low church means. There's one other term that we generally use today, because that is what I would probably say a majority of the Episcopal Church is now, is broad church. We're somewhere in between. True middle way in that regard. But there was immense amount of hostilities between the New England churches that followed Samuel Seabury, the Southern and Mid-Atlantic churches that followed William White, and then a whole nother side that I didn't even talk about, The Methodist Episcopal Church, formed by John Wesley, they were technically part of the Church of England, but after the Revolution, Wesley sent 2 people to become superintendents, which in Greek is episcopate. So when they got here, they called themselves bishops, and they proclaimed themselves bishops. So they started their own church called the Methodist Episcopal Church.
They've never been consecrated by bishops,
Nope.
so no apostolic succession.
They technically have it now, but then no. And there's only 2 of them, so they could not even technically give it or ordain people at some point. Because again, it takes 3 bishops to make a bishop. But so when there's efforts to try to unite into one church, the Methodist Episcopal Church just refused. It was only between the New England Church under Seabury and the Southern Mid-Atlantic Church with William White and Samuel Provost that worked in making the church. But there was a lot of disagreements. The biggest one was being over episcopal authority. New England saw too much authority given away to the laity in how the conventions worked. And the Southern Middle wondered if the hierarchical nature of the New England Anglican Church, I don't really know what to call it at this time, I guess Episcopal, of the New England Episcopal Church was compatible with the New Republic. And there's a lot of hostility between the 2. Samuel Seabury would ordain priests in areas that were not under his purview. And without the authority of the local synod or convention. And so in response, the Mid-Atlantic and the Southern churches refused to allow those people to practice because they questioned the validity of Samuel Seabury's ordination to the as bishop. So they questioned his orders, especially because it was from non-juring bishops of the Scottish Episcopal Church. And so Provost and Seabury were bitter rivals. And so there was a very opportunistic time where William White, noting that Samuel Provost could not attend the convention of 1789, decided to invite Samuel Seabury to the convention, where William White made a bunch of concessions to the objections of Samuel Seabury. So White recognized Seabury's orders as bishop. White agreed to a bicameral general convention. So currently our general convention has a House of Bishops and the House of Deputies. And Seabury wanted the bishops to have a veto power. White gave the bishops veto power, but also a method for the deputies to override the veto. Not all of Samuel Seabury's objections were met, but enough were that he agreed to join the General Convention, and they were all of his delegates in New England were seated in General Convention of 1789, and they wrote the first Book of Common Prayer in America. That was the 1789 Book of Common Prayer. There was one attempt to make a Book of Common Prayer in 1786, but it took too far of a weird change, removed things like Jesus descended into hell from the Apostles' Creed, stuff like that. It took the 39 articles and made 20 articles. Some very weird changes. It didn't get approved. So they basically removed all the issues from the 1786. And in the Eucharistic prayer, they did take influence from the Scottish Episcopal Prayer Book and the 1549 Prayer Book. So our lineage of prayer book is from 1549. And it set up a rotating presiding bishop, at least for the first 6 years. And so it rotated between William White as the first presiding bishop, then Samuel Seabury, and then Samuel Provost. And then after about 6 years, it became a matter of seniority. So William White became the fourth presiding bishop, or remained presiding bishop from 1800 to 1836. He lived a long time.
And Brian,
Yep.
what's going on with the Methodist Episcopal Church at this point? Did it have center of gravity or geography?
That I'm not certain of. The question was about the Methodist Episcopal Church and what was their center of gravity. I know the structure of Methodism made it really easy to propagate and to spread. Even after the colonial and early republic years, Methodism was a far easier thing to spread in westward than the Episcopal Church was. Our emphasis on bishops made it really hard to start new colonies or to start new dioceses in other places. And kind of the importance of clergy per se as well. Methodists do have an importance, but because a lot of it is lay reading, a lot of it can be lay led, especially at this time. So it made it far more flexible to travel. And things like the First Great Awakening really made lower churches and even some congregational churches fall towards Methodism. So one of the first concerns of the new Episcopal Church was getting more bishops. At the Convention of 1789, there was a request from the Convention of Massachusetts to consecrate their elected person bishop for them. White was opposed to this because the Archbishop of Canterbury did not grant them permission, and they did not have 3 from either the Scottish or English line of succession. So again, the issue of Seabury's consecration became an issue, even though they said they accepted it. England never wrote back. That slightly changed, though, a year later because in 1790, James Madison was elected bishop in Virginia. He went to England and was consecrated. So in 1792, White, Provost, Madison, and Seabury all attended the consecration of Thomas Clagett, Bishop of Maryland. That's him right here. And that was the first person consecrated bishop on American soil and by Americans. And that was the only bishop that Seabury consecrated. So the question of lineage was never had to be brought up again. But in Clagett was kind of the merger of the Scottish Episcopal and the English line of successions. And so by 1792, the Episcopal Church was fully functional. It had 9 state conventions, but it took a while to find bishops to actually lead those conventions and dioceses, i.e. New Jersey did not consecrate a bishop until 1815. And some of these conventions struggled to really get going. Georgia was the youngest colony, and by 1792 really only had one functioning church in Savannah. And most of the leaders of the church, because of the war, there was kind of just a stop of ordaining clergy at all. And it was hard, and we lost a fair amount of clergy to fleeing to Canada, going back to England. That leadership was not prevalent, per se, and not enough people who had enough experience as clergy to be ordained bishop. So it took a while for a lot of these, for this whole system to kind of start. But we at least had a functioning general convention, and the New England and the Mid-Atlantic and Southern states were now united. So some things to keep to remember. This is the church in Williamsburg, Virginia, so one of the oldest churches in the country. Where is authority? One thing that was not settled was the nature of General Convention. We now see General Convention as the ultimate authority in the Episcopal Church. They set policy for us, but it was very much debated, does General Convention have say in individual dioceses? Can they dictate authority over the church? That was not yet questioned nor really sorted out by the time in 1792. Do bishops have authority? Do people have authority? Does the state you live in have authority over the church? All things that weren't really debated, just kind of glossed over, at least right after this time. The Via Media again, between low and high, clergy and laity. The importance of the historic episcopacy. Is the Scottish line correct? Is it legitimate? How do we verify that? And the one that we're really going to be focusing on next week is how is our relationship to England and the Scottish Episcopal Church? What is it? Because we're definitely, William White still wanted to ask the Archbishop of Canterbury, can I do this? Though they had no say, technically, in the Episcopal Church. And having read general conventions up until 1850, it was kind of weird about how we're supposed to see the Church of England and the Scottish Episcopal Church. We never really, no one ever took the time to consider until about the mid-19th century, so what is our relationship to each other? How do we function together? Are we still related at this point? So that is what we're talking about next week, is kind of the actual founding of the communion. But that question will get somewhat resolved then.
We put both the cross of St. Andrew and the cross of St. George.
True.
And the shield.
So this is the Episcopal shield right here. Brad commented about the cross of St. George, which is the red and white cross, and the cross of St. Andrew, which is in this corner. That's the blue and white one. And it also has 9 crosses representing the 9 original dioceses of the Episcopal Church. But again, though, it took quite some time for all those dioceses to have a bishop. But yeah, so our shield shows the heritage of both the English line of succession, the Scottish line of succession, and our own founding as a church with the 9 original dioceses.
Do you know when that shield was adopted?
I think 1940. So it's not that old comparatively. Are there any other questions?
This is interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's an era that I've often wondered why it evolved this way.
Yeah.
Well, I think the real dilemma, you just had a revolution separated from Europe, You can't call it the Church of America, but the Constitution says you can.
We tried our darndest, though, to make ourselves the state church.
Well, you could be Church of Virginia, or Church of
I-
Connecticut.
Well, why does the Episcopal Church have the national cathedral? We were very much attempting to be the church of the United States.
Well, it takes for kind of ceremony reasons it does.
Hmm. I mean, during World War II, you either got a Catholic prayer book or the Book of Common Prayer. All Protestants got the Book of Common Prayer. Irrelevant if you were Presbyterian, Lutheran, the U.S. government gave you a BCP.
Franklin Roosevelt, Episcopalian.
He was. My friend is the rector at the church his family attended in Hyde Park. Yep. Teddy was not, though, I don't think. Yep. Well,
Well, it's not technically called Russian Cathedral. It's an affection.
fair.
It's really this Washington.
That's fair. Of the book, which, Brad, if you want to read it, I can lend it to you, the history of the Episcopal Church, there is a whole section about us truly trying in the late 19th century, early 20th, to be the nation's church. Yeah, to various degrees of success. But
We still have state temples in the cathedral.
yeah, I mean, it's also just the biggest cathedral in Washington, too. But we are the ones who generally lead the service.
And the second biggest in the country.
That I don't know. I mean, the longest Gothic cathedral is St. John the Divine in the world, I actually think. There might be one Catholic cathedral that is bigger, maybe the National Basilica in Baltimore. That one might be bigger. But yeah. But that is all I have for you folks. Yeah. Thank you for coming.